Okay, good morning. We are in Parshas Bechukosai on page 708, 709 in the Art Scroll. And interesting Parsha. A very scary Parsha, but an extremely rewarding Parsha. We'll come back to what the scariness and the rewarding part of it all are. A very reasonably short Parsha. I think it's only 67, 70. I looked this up, but my brain's still a little bit cold this morning, as on my hands. 78 verses. So relatively short Parsha. In many years, last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha are read together. And I want to come back to reasons why we have Parshas read together, not together in a whole thing, based on when we read this week's Parsha. We'll try and come back to that at the end. Okay. Parsha Bechukosai. Im Bechukosai telechu. If you follow in my, they translate here as decrees, Vet mitzvahs and my mitzvahs, vasisim oisam, and you perform them. So 3 things: you follow Hashem's decrees, observe His mitzvahs, and perform them. Then you can see on the left there it says they're miracles of blessing and curse. Then you're going to get these incredible blessings. Come back to that in a moment. The question is, and Rashi answers this for us, what does it mean if you follow in Hashem's decrees? Because we know in several weeks' time we're getting Parshas Chukas, and that's the same word. Bechukosai is the shoresh, the root of the word is a chok, a mitzvah that we don't understand. And the Torah there discusses what is the mitzvah that nobody understands. King Solomon himself, Shlomo HaMelech, said he understood everything, but he could not understand the whole thing with the chok, and that is the mitzvah of para aduma, which is if a person comes in contact with a dead body, they become tameh, become impure, and need to be purified with the ashes of a red heifer that's sprinkled on the person on day 3 and day 7. Now we don't have that today, and so we can't become purified from contact with the dead. And in fact, rabbinically, the rabbis ruled that the whole world outside of Israel is tameh. We are all considered, at least rabbinically, tameh meis. Anybody who's been to a funeral where the coffin is in the room in the funeral parlor. Now in Melbourne, our 2 cemeteries that we use doesn't have that anymore, but the previous Springvale they did. Kohanim couldn't go in there. But anybody who sat in that room is tameh meis, is contaminated with this spiritual impurity. And so we're all considered spiritually impure. So that's what that chok's about. So what's that? Why? And then that is Parshas Chukas. This week's Parsha is talking about Hashem's decrees, His mitzvahs we don't understand. Rashi says, what does that mean? That means if you learn Torah. If you get involved with learning Torah, then you will benefit all these blessings that come around. Learning Torah doesn't mean learning Torah just for the sake of learning Torah. Learning Torah means learning Torah for the sake of doing what you learn. It's always that next step. It's very nice to sit in a university and learn Gemara and pull it apart and do all these analytical views of the way things are written and whatever else. But if you don't practice it, then that's not what the Parsha is saying. So the Parsha is telling us, if you follow Hashem's decrees and you observe the mitzvahs and you perform them, then you will get these blessings. In fact, when we go to the next world, the Gemara brings the first question a person's going to be asked is, did you set aside regular time for learning Torah? And regular time for a man to learn Torah is every 12 hours. Now, it doesn't mean 12 hours and then the next. Every day and every night, did you set aside time to learn Torah? What does that mean, set aside? It means, did you commit to doing something regularly? Something could be something very small. It doesn't, but that's really what it's about. Involve yourself in Hashem's Torah. It will change your life. That's what the Parsha is telling us. And how will it change our life? I'll come back to it in a moment. I just want to read. When we say Birkas HaTorah, the Torah blessings every morning, we say 2 blessings. Or let's go step back. The first thing we do in the morning is wash hands, and we say a blessing on washing our hands, and we thank Hashem for giving us and the neshama back. So we wake up and say Modani, wash hands, and then there's various customs as to exactly when each of these blessings are said, but the Art Scroll Seder brings it. In fact, when a person's in shul, most people I know say it before going to shul, so that if you're learning Torah, when I get in the car and I'm listening to a shiur, I've already said Birkas HaTorah. So we wash our hands, say Netilas Yadayim, and then we thank Hashem for giving us wisdom and if we're going for the bathroom, we say the bracha for going to the bathroom. Then we thank Hashem for giving us our soul back, for putting the soul in our body. We are physical beings who have a neshama within us. The body is really just the clothing for the neshama, which allows us to be in this world to do mitzvahs. That's what we have a body for. The difference between this world and the next world is the neshama is exposed, available, and free without the encumbrances of a body. However, the person in the next world can't do mitzvahs. So this week's parsha comes along and says, do these mitzvahs. Then we say what we... They're correct. When the Vilna Gaon was dying, he was crying. He was in his end of his life. And his Talmidim said to him, why are you crying? You know where you're going. You're going to the highest levels of the next world of Gan Eden. And he said, I'm crying because the mitzvah of tzitzis costs me a couple of kopecks, whatever it was, a few dollars. To put on tzitzis is almost virtually free. And I won't be able to do that mitzvah in the next world. That's what he was thinking about. His level, he'd learned a whole Torah, he taught the whole Torah, he knew everything. But that's what he was concerned, because he wouldn't have that opportunity in the next world. So this world is the world of opportunity.
Why aren't you buried with the tzitzis?
Person is buried with their talis.
The talis, but not...
No, it's the same thing. It's just a garment with tzitzit. But it's a person's buried with a talis that's made possible, that's invalid, because we can't do mitzvahs in the next world. And so there's a whole thing. You don't go to a funeral with tzitzis out. If you wear your tzitzis out normally, you tuck them in, because we shouldn't embarrass the people lying there, because they can't do that mitzvah anymore. And so, which proves to us that those neshamas are there. They're with us in this world. We're not on a level to be able to experience them.
What happens if you're a Vachter and you're sitting, a Jewish person sitting with a dead body?
Yeah.
How do you Vachter?
And what you say to Hillel and things like that. But
how does it absolve you from... You said that when you're near...
No, they are Tamei, absolutely. A person who works in the Chevra Kaddish, a person who does Taharo, washes the body, etc. Anybody who comes in contact in Torah times, in Beis Medrash times, Beis HaMikdash times, when we had the temple, we had the ability to purify ourselves. You weren't allowed on the Temple Mount, and that's the whole thing. We only have little bits of vestiges of purity and impurity in our world today. We don't have the ability to clear it out, and so we don't live with that. In temple times, people lived with that. Kohanim, who got truma, one of the gifts given to Kohanim, and their families were only allowed to eat truma when they were in a state of purity. And so there was a whole different way of life in terms of how we lived our lives. We live our lives in an impure fashion in that respect. In previous time, and please God will be soon, we need to learn how to live our lives. So anybody who comes in contact with the dead, we learned last week about Pesach Sheni. The reason for Pesach Sheni was because people had been in contact with the dead and they hadn't had the opportunity to purify themselves. Okay, but let's come back to brachas of the Torah. So we say two birkas, what we call birkas HaTorah, blessings of the Torah, where in fact, we use the words in the first one, Asher kishan b'mitzvah sav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. We say to Hashem, blessed are you, Hashem, who sanctified us with mitzvahs and commanded us to la'asot, to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. And we ask Hashem to sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth, in the mouth of our people, and of the Jewish people. And then we say, may us and our offspring of your people, and our offspring and the offspring of all the Jewish people, the house of Israel, all of us, we say, we including everybody in all of this blessing, know your name Hashem and study your Torah for its own sake. At the end of the day, we learn Torah for the sake of learning Torah. And then we say, Baruch atah Hashem, hamelamed Torah l'mo Yisrael, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Then we say the same bracha that we would say when we called up to Torah, Asher bacha banu mikol amim, And then we learn Torah. And we say three things. So we say Birkat Kohanim. It's not in there. This is in the Siddur. Birkat Kohanim is in the Torah, but it's in a few weeks' time's Parsha. The blessing of the Torah. We learn something from the written Torah. We learn something from a Mishnah. We learn something from a Gemara. And those are the two things I want to just briefly focus on. The Mishnah from Peah, Elu Devarim she'en lahem shiur. These mitzvahs have no prescribed measure. So in other words, the Torah says, take a tithe. You take 10% and give Maaseh Rishon to the Levi. That's a specific measure. But there's certain mitzvahs which have no measure whatsoever. You can give a little bit or a lot. And these are Hapeah, leaving the corn of the field, Bikurim, which is this time of the year people take their first fruits, Harayon, going up to the temple for Ola Regel, for the pilgrimage, 3 times a year, Gemilas Chasadim, acts of kindness, V'Talmud Torah, and learning Torah. Those mitzvahs, a little bit, a lot, you're doing the mitzvah. There's no measure for how much of the mitzvah you have. Then the next thing we say is a Gemara from Shabbos, which starts off in the same way. Elu devarim she'adam oichel peritem b'olam hazeh. These are the mitzvahs, elu devarim, which a person enjoys the fruits of them in this world. V'keren kayemet lo l'olam haba. The principle remains intact for the person for the next world. And that's really what mitzvahs are about. We get a little bit of a reward in this world, but the main reward is in the next world. We do mitzvahs for the next world. This week's Parsha is slightly different, and that's why I want to bring it in. What are these mitzvahs? I'll just go through them in English. Honoring parents, honor due to father and mother, acts of kindness, the same acts of kindness that we had in the Mishnah. Early attendance to shul in the morning and at night. Hachnasas ochim, hospitality to guests. Bikur cholim, visiting the sick. Providing for a bride, in other words, helping Jewish people to get married. Escorting the dead, if a person is particularly a Meis Mitzvah. There's a group in Melbourne who on a group that if there is not a minyan available for a funeral, they get called. Huge mitzvah. Volunteering for Chevra Kedisha, that type of thing. Absorption in prayer, when we daven, focusing on what the words mean and really concentrating on our prayer. And Avas Shalom ben Adam lechavero, bringing peace between man and his fellow. It was said that Aaron HaKohen was Oyev Shalom v'Oredev Shalom. He loved peace and he chased after peace. If he found out that two people were not talking or fighting, he would go and make peace between them. And he'd go to the one and he'd say, I heard that you and your friend, let's just use the name Shimon and Levi. He goes to Shimon and he said, I heard you and Levi were not getting on so well. I know that Levi really wants to make up with you. I think it's worth making up. And he'd go to Levi and he'd say, I heard that you and Shimon were not doing so well. I know that Shimon really wants to make up with you. And he'd get the people together. And when Aaron died, the Jewish people came to a complete standstill. Everybody was in mourning for him because he created this atmosphere of peace. And in fact, Birkat Kohanim, which we said just before that, ends with peace. In fact, every tefillah we have ends with peace. We end the Shemona Esrei with Sim Shalom. We end Birkas Kohanim with Shalom. We end benching with Shalom. Everything we do, our goal in the world is about having real peace. That's what it's about. And going through the process of this Parsha, we will see how we can get peace, because that's part of what the beginning part of the Parsha is. And then it finally says, V'Talmud Torah keneged klam. But learning Torah is equal to all of these things. In other words, one bit of learning Torah, as if you have done all of those other mitzvahs, that's the reward in the next world. Okay, so what are we promised in this world if we learn Torah, perform Hashem's mitzvahs? What will we get? We'll get, I'm just going to run through this in English. Provide your rains in their time. I'm in 709 verse 4. The land will give its produce and tree of the field will give its fruit. Your threshing will last until the vintage, and the vintage will last until the sowing, and you will eat your bread in satiety, and you will dwell securely in your land. If we do what Hashem wants, if we learn Torah according to what Rashi says in the base case, and do the mitzvahs, then we will be guaranteed peace. Because the next part of it, I will provide peace in your land. You'll lie down, no one will frighten you. I'll cause wild beasts to withdraw from the land. We know that Yishmael was called a para Adam, an animal man, a wild beast of a man, or a wild beast who is a man. However we want to do it. Yishmael's descendants are our cousins, the Arabs. And they behaved in the last 7 months, particularly on October 7, and after that, very much as the para part, not the Adam part, the wild beast part. The world looks at us and says, we're behaving like this wild beast, but if we focus on these things, then we will have complete peace. And what it means by peace here is peace within ourselves, that we're at peace in our own minds, in our own psyche, that we are content and happy with where we are in life, that we are at peace in all our relationships, whether it's within the home, bigger family groups, the whole community, the wider world, or the Jewish world, the wider world. That's real peace, where we can sit down and just be comfortable knowing that we can walk in the streets being proud of who we are. Not that we're looking over our shoulder that someone might be there to get us. And the only way we can guarantee that is by following this Parsha.
So that all this is dependent on your loyalty, on your learning, on your doing.
Yep. Very, very much so. Yeah. So that's what it's saying. If we look back at October 7, where Israel was at, there was no unity. And this is talking about let's be unified. Because if we're unified, if we learn Torah and we focus on doing mitzvahs and we focus on doing the right thing, that'll bring us all having a common goal. And if we have a common goal, we're unified, and then nobody will attack us. You'll pursue your enemies, they will fall before you by the sword. The next part is, if you just look at the maths of that, 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 will pursue 10,000. It doesn't quite work out mathematically. Because we are so unified, we don't need to have massive armies to protect us. Hashem will give us that ability that people will just disappear from being our enemies. Your enemies will fall before you. Hashem says, I will turn my attention to you, I will make you fruitful, increase you, and I will establish my covenant with you. At the end of the day, that's what we want. We want Hashem's bris, his covenant, to be established with us. This covenant was given to us at Har Sinai. We signed a deal with Hashem then. It says in Purim, in the Megillah, that we re-established it, we re-accepted it completely, and therefore we have set up that covenant. We need to just uphold our end of the bargain. And if we uphold our end of the bargain, as in any contract, a covenant's a contract. If both parties keep their side of the bargain, then the contract works. Where we don't, then the other party doesn't have to keep their part of the bargain. And that's as simple as that. We learned in last week's Parsha, the week before, how if we don't keep Shemitah, and if we don't follow the rules of the law of the land of Israel, the land will vomit us out. And that's a follow-on. This is really just a complete follow-on of the last week's Parsha. Okay, what else will happen? You'll eat old grain and remove the old to make way for the new. In other words, your grain's going to sit in the silos and remain fresh. And you won't have problems. You'll have an abundance of produce. Struggling to turn a page here. Okay. My sanctuary, it goes, I will place my sanctuary among you, my spirit will not reject you, I will walk among you, and I'll be a God to you, and you'll be a people to me, says Hashem your God. Took you out of the land of Egypt from being slaves, I broke the staves of your yoke, and I led you erect. The blessings of this world, that's really what this is about. We want to live in peace in this world. It's a simple formula. Be unified with Hashem. Be unified with ourselves as a people, and Hashem will be our God. Quite simple. The Torah then flips completely. So it started off and said, Im Bechukosai telechu, if you follow my decrees. Now it says, V'im lo tishmu li, but if you don't listen to me, v'lo sa'aseh es kol hamitzvahs ha'eleh, and you don't perform all of these mitzvahs, if you consider my decrees loathsome, if you bring your rejects, if your being rejects my ordinance so as not to perform the mitzvahs, so that you will annul my covenant, then I'm going to do the same to you. Hashem says, you don't want to be on my team? Well, I'm withdrawing from the game completely. And let's use that sports analogy. I will sign upon you panic, swelling lesions, burning fever, eyes to long, and your souls to suffer. You will sow your seeds in vain. Your enemies will eat it. Your seeds, that is. I will turn my attention against you. You'll be struck down before your enemies. Those who hate you will subjugate you. You will flee with no one pursuing you. This goes on for many, many verses. It's brought here, we go through from page 711 through to 716, 717, with the, what we call the Toichacha, series of punishments. Art Scroll seems to bring 5. Rashi counts that there's 7 different groupings of admonition, of curses that will come upon us. These curses are not things we would want to live through because they are very, very frightening. And there are 2 series of curses in the Torah. There's one here, and there's one in Parshas Kisavo, right near the end of Sefer Devarim. And we'll come back, please God, to the way we read them and when we read them and why we read them this week, as opposed to any other week. It's learnt out that this series and the series in Parshas Kisavo that are the series of curses are things that happened in the first temple, in the second temple, but there are things that keep happening in different ways. Because if we don't, if you don't listen to Hashem, you don't perform what He tells us to do, then this is what the consequences. It's not, life is not about reward and punishment. It's put in here that, but it's actually consequence. If a child misbehaves, we always talk about punishing the child. The better way of talking about it is, if you don't do the right thing, the consequence of your action is such and such. Not you getting punished for it, because that's not going to help the person to improve. But if the person knows that if they did something wrong, the consequences are something else, it might help to improve that child. Or all of us, for that matter. I heard when I was just driving in here, I had the radio on. They were talking about this whole debate that's going on with HEX and how much people have got HEX debts and, you know.
Don't tell me ABC.
3AW it was on. It just happened to be on in my car. I normally don't listen, but when I got a 1 minute drive, it kind of was on. My Shia won't start up in that 1 minute in that car, and the other car starts straight away. But somebody phoned in and said their child is 5 years at uni, I think they said, and they had a 60,000 HEX debt that they're paying off. Did you know that if you're in jail, you can get a degree, probably in criminology, and no HEX whatsoever? It was just. It was, so that's. So yes, if you think about going back to university and you want a free education
and free food, board and lodge, what do you need? And
the problem with jail. Let's talk about reward and punishment. The problem with jail is most people go into jail as low-level criminals, come out as hardened criminals. That's because of
it's the company you keep.
Exactly right. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos talks about that. Live in an area where your neighbors are good neighbors. Rather have good neighbors, because the influence of where we live, of who we mix with, influences us in everything in life. So choose your neighbors well.
If you can.
No, you always can.
They're not a good influence.
You can always move away from people who are bad influence. In fact, that's what we should.
But the next block might be good.
No. But maybe then, if we keep moving and moving and moving, we might realize that it might be us.
I've got the best neighbors.
As opposed to them. But yeah, we need to make sure that if we are a good neighbor, we'll influence our neighbors that they can become better.
And as we said yesterday, you're nice to the people you're dealing with, you're going to get nice in return.
And there is
Absolutely.
no question.
People behave to us the way we behave to them. It's like a mirror.
It's true.
And so there's stories of, I can't remember who it is. One of the big major rabbis in the last generation in America had passed away. And there was a lady in a corner store or something, a non-Jewish woman who saw a Jewish person there and said to him, "Where's that man, that rabbi that always used to walk past him?" So he said, "Are you talking about X?" This rabbi described him to her, and she said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry, but he passed away a month ago." She said, "Oh, I was so upset because every morning I saw him, he walked past me, he'd go out of his way to greet me and give me a smile." And that's, there's a very famous story actually just came to mind. It's obviously very difficult in Israel to have cattle, because there's not much room to shecht cows is a difficult thing. So they send groups of people to South America, they send them sometimes here, where they come in for months, they shecht en masse, they do all the kashering and butchering the animal, everything they need to do, freeze it, and then ship it back to Israel. Most of the Israeli, certainly beef, is not from Israel. Argentina, from here, we've had groups of people come here, living here for 3-4 months at a time, and so you have a whole team of people that does the entire work required. There's a story, as far as I remember, it was in Argentina, where these group of rabbis were there, and shoichtim and a whole group of people were there, and they were staying in the town, and they used to go out to the abattoir every day in a bus, and they all get on the bus, and they're about to leave, and the security guard comes running, and he says, "Wait, somebody's not here." And they do a count around this big bus, and they realize one of their people is not there. And they go back in, and they do this search through the thing, and they find this man freezing, almost dead, in one of the freezers.
Oh, right.
He was in a walk-in freezer, and the door had closed, and they had left. Thank God they got to him before, and they got him out, and thank God he was saved. And they said to the security guard, "How did you know? Did you count us every day?" He said, "No. He's the person who every single day asked me how it was, how my family was, and smiled at me."
There you go.
And so, just like that, here's a non-Jewish security guard who he had the time just to say good morning to this person and give him a smile, saved his life.
It's easier to be nice than not nice.
No, it's much easier to be not nice. It's much easier to turn away. It takes effort to actually thinking of other people. Once it becomes part of us, it's a different story, but we need to make that part of us. It needs to
be
become...
not nice, you've got to think about it.
It depends on the person. You're a special person, but it does depend on most of us.
You're his mother.
That's right, I inherited it, hopefully. But no, it takes work to think about other people. We develop habits. Most of our habits that we develop become just this rote, going through the motions. Why do we do it? Because we did it yesterday. We need to develop habits that are good habits, that we think about, what will the other person think? Then we get to that point where somebody could save our life because we were nice to them.
What a story.
Yeah, it just hit my mind now. Shem put that in my head. Okay, so we've gone through following Hashem's statutes. We've looked at, just very quickly, the introduction to the Toichacha, to the admonition, to the curses. I don't want to go through them in detail. There are things in here that were quite horrific, and we will just, for the moment, just know that these terrible, terrible things have happened to the Jewish people over the centuries, time and time and time again. And we read through them and we can see, what's going on potentially now. Much of it is written in this week's Parsha. The interesting thing is with the Toichacha, our custom generally in shuls today is we don't call up somebody for the Aliyah. When it gets to this Aliyah this week, they'll be quiet. The Gabbai won't say Yamoid Chaim Ben Shmerel. So we get to Shlishi, he'll be quiet. Generally, the shul will give it to the Balkara, the person who's laning. So he knows he's going to get it. Now, if he's a Kohen or something, then the Gabbai will step up. Somebody will just step up. They'll be told, just step up there. They're not called up for their Aliyah. we do give them a mishaberach, obviously, but it's just to push it aside. We need to say, this laning, we don't want this to happen. We don't want to put this onto somebody. We're not going to call somebody up and say, oh, by the way, you merited to get these curses. We just keep quiet about it. But we still give them a mishaberach. It's still a proper aliyah, but we just push it down a little bit. We also read it quieter and faster. So the person, we want to have the good things in life, and the way we have the good things is by following the beginning of the parsha, not if we don't do it. And the Tochacha ends, if we go to 716, the top of the page, there's just thrown into, just towards the end of it, right at the top of the page on verse Mem Beis 42, it says, "V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov v'af es brisi Yitzchak v'af es brisi Abraham eskor v'haaretz eskor." Hashem says, I will remember the covenant with Yaakov, the covenant with Yitzchak, and the covenant with Abraham. Will I remember, and I'll remember the land. But then it jumps straight back into Torah. But there's this little bright lights in life that even through our hardest times, even though we might be suffering at the lowest of low points in Jewish history, we need to know there's always that light. And that light's not at the end of the tunnel. That light's right there. Hashem's right there with us in the galus, suffering as well. Just like we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash in Shemayim, Hashem also doesn't have his home available for, if we can say these things, for him to dwell in it in comfort like we want to dwell in comfort. But Hashem says he will remember these covenants. And it all ends and says that these are the decrees and teaching Hashem gave between him and the children of Israel at Har Sinai, Biad Moshe, through Moshe. That ends the Tochacha. The rest of the Parsha discusses gifts to the temple. A person can donate their value to the temple, called Erchin. Each person is worth a different value in terms of they want to give a donation. I want to give something to the Beis HaMikdash. They will give their value. We've got a whole Masechta in Gemara on what that's all about. And then talk about sanctification, redemption of animals, and redemption of houses and fields in Yovel, like we had in the previous Parsha. And then the Parsha ends with the second tithe, Maaseh Sheni, and tithing animals. Every 10th animal we have to take out that becomes sanctified. So just very, very briefly, just in terms of, let's just take a farmer in the land of Israel, and he has 100 barrels of produce. What does he have to give away to other people, which is the mitzvahs of the land? Today, we still have to do this in Israel to a certain degree, but not all of it. I said before, the first thing we give is truma, which is given to a kohen. Challah is similar to truma. Challah is called a truma that we give to the kohen. So, in terms of produce, we'll keep with this 100. There's no amount that's given for truma. How much do you have to give? It varies. But generally, an average person will give 1/40th. A miserly person will give 1/60th, and a generous person will give. A generous person will give a 40th, an average person a 50th, and a miserly person a 60th. Let's just go with 2 out of our 100, 1/40th. Okay, so 2 of them are now gone. So we're 98 left. We then come to Maaseh Rishon, which is given to the Levi. 10% of what's left, 9.8 of it is now given to the Levi. So now we're down to 90, almost. The Levi has to give 10% of that to the Kohen. So the Kohen gets 2% of the produce plus 10% of what the Levi had. The Levi gets the next part of it. What the Levi gets doesn't have to be eaten in Kedusha and holiness. But the Kohen's part doesn't. And the Kohen's part, only the Kohen, his family, his slaves are allowed to eat it. The Kohen's daughter, when she's living in his home, she's not married, can eat truma. If she marries a non-Kohen, she's no longer allowed to eat it. If a woman is not a bas Kohen and she marries a Kohen, she's allowed to eat it. And so if It's a whole formula through. We learn this throughout the Torah and through the Gemara. Discuss a lot of that. Then we have what's called Maaseh Sheni, which is what we've got in the sixth parsha. In the first, we've got a Shemitah cycle of 7 years. In the first, second, fourth, and fifth year, 1, 2, 4, 5 years of the cycle, Maaseh Sheni is taken by the person to Yerushalayim and eaten in Yerushalayim. If he can't, he's got a lot of, in our case here, there's 10% of what's left. It's 9 or thereabouts of our 100. That's a lot of food to take to Yerushalayim. He can redeem that on money and pay I don't want to use the word penalty, but pay a small amount extra, what we call a fifth extra, and take that money, so the 100 plus a fifth, let's just say it's 100. Now, it's not a fifth of 100, it's a fifth of the final. So it's actually 25. It's a fifth. So you got to work work out what is the end product and take a fifth of that. So it's 125. It needs to add 25. Takes his $125 and goes to Yerushalayim and needs to buy food and eat that in Yerushalayim. That made Yerushalayim the center of Jewish life. It made all the yeshivas and all the people learning, because then the farmers would send the money for their kids to have food while they were living in Yerushalayim, or themselves. In the other 2 years of the 7-year cycle, in the third and the sixth year, it's what's called Maaseh Ani, and that was given to poor people. Besides for the gifts of Pei Shechva, of leaving the corner, of drop, if a farmer dropped a sheaf in the farm, the poor people would get that, or they would glean behind the farmers. All of those, plus were every year, poor people were allowed to come into the farms and take various parts of it. But they also got in the third and the sixth year 10%, which was left over. So at the end of the day, the farmer's got 100, he's given away around 20 before he even starts. In our times, I guess we would call that tax. The Torah is calling that mitzvahs. That's what we need to know, is whatever we've got is not ours. It's come from Hashem. It's purely from Hashem. And we need to recognize that. And how do we recognize that? By thinking of other people. Because all of this is pretty much, most of it is for other people. And this week's Parsha being the end of Sefer Vayikra, the last person who gets called up, we were going to say Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazak. And it's good to give somebody that aliyah somebody maybe is going through a hard time or something like that, they should be strengthened. And so it's always a big thing. So the question is, why do we read this Parsha now? And for that, we need to go to a Gemara in Megillah, which explains the structure of everything that we read, when we read it. So the Gemara in Megillah, right at the end of Megillah is only 32 pages. On the second last page, on 31b, the Gemara is discussing how we lay in the Teichacha, what we do about it, whether we're allowed to interrupt, we're not allowed to interrupt. And then the Gemara brings a ruling about the Teichacha. It says that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Ezra tiken lahem l'Yisrael. Ezra, who was the leader of the Jewish people, who at the beginning of the second temple came out after the story of Megillah, of the Purim story, 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, went back to Israel, and Ezra re-established the Jewish community and rebuilt the temple, built the second temple in Jerusalem. So Ezra established that Ezra tiken lahem l'Yisrael. Ezra established the creed for Klal Yisrael. Shayokarin klalos shebatorah kohanim, Torah's kohanim kodem atzeres. That we should read the curses of what we call Torah's Kohanim, what we call it Leviticus. The book that is about Kohanim. We call the book of Leviticus Vayikra. The Gemara refers to it as Torah's Kohanim, the Torah of the Kohanim, because all the laws for Kohanim are found in Vayikra. So Ezra decreed that we should read the curses of Vayikra in this week's Parsha prior to Atzeres. Atzeres is the Gemara term for Shavuos. So before Shavuos, we need to read these curses. Sheba Mishnah Torah, what the Gemara calls Mishnah Torah, which is Devarim, the end of the Torah, the last book of the Torah, Kodem Rosh Hashanah. And those in Devarim we need to read before Rosh Hashanah. So Ezra put a decree in place that this is how we need to, when we need to lay the two parshas of the curses. So what's the reason? The Gemara says. So Abaya says, or some say Reish Lakish says, Kedei shetichle hashana v'kol, that the year may end along with its curses. Those curses should come at the end of the year, and that should be the end of the curses. Let's start afresh with a new year. So the Gemara says, well, great, that's fine. Mishnah Torah, that's great with Devarim. We know that Devarim, that is read before Rosh Hashanah. So before Rosh Hashanah, we will end the year with those curses. But that year should end with its curses. But what about Toras Kohanim? What about Vayikra? What's this Vayikra got to do with Shavuos? Is Shavuos the beginning of the year? Rosh Hashanah is in Tishrei. The Gemara says yes. Atzeres Nami Rosh Hashanah. Shavuos is a Rosh Hashanah. Because we learned in a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Vatzeres al Peres ha'ilan. On Shavuos we are judged concerning fruit of the trees. It's a new year for the fruit of the trees. And since it's a day of judgment, we can consider that a new year. And so that's why we read it now. We read it now so that the year should end. What the Gemara goes on to discuss is how we do the whole laning, because what we now need to do is we now need to fit in a year the Tochacha of this week's Parsha before Shavuos, the Tochacha of Kisavo before Rosh Hashanah, and we need to finish the Torah on Simchas Torah, which is just a few weeks after Rosh Hashanah, after Kisavo. And so how do we fit the whole Torah in is what the Gemara goes on to discuss briefly. I did discuss this firstly how that we lay on Shabbos afternoon, or Shabbos morning we lay on a whole Parsha. Gemara then goes on to say, well, on Shabbos afternoon we'll read what's coming next. In other words, we read the beginning of next week's Parsha, and we do the same on Monday and Thursday, and then we start again from that place on the next Shabbos. And so it puts the formula in place of when we read Monday, Thursday. We read Monday, Thursday because it says we should never go 3 days without learning Torah.
You need to be an accountant to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. We just need a little bit of math sometimes. Just a little bit. Okay, then it discusses how we should say the brachas, not for now. And so the whole premise of the way we read the Torah is around that the curses are before Shavuos and before Rosh Hashanah. But we have a couple of weeks before Shavuos. We've got, this week's Parsha is Bechukosai. Then we start Sefer Bamidbar. Then it's Shavuot. And then we go to Parshas Naso. And the same thing with Rosh Hashanah. Ki Savo is always at least a week before, because Nitzavim needs to be before Rosh Hashanah. And so what it's learned out is that we need to have a buffer. We can't go to Rosh Hashanah with these curses entirely focusing on this negativity. We need to have time to focus on the negativity so we can turn our lives around, so that we can flip the switch and figure, okay, if I don't do the right thing, well, these are the curses. And the list here is half the size of the one at the end of the Parsha. That's double this one. And so, because of this structure, in most years we have Bamidbar. Bamidbar has to be before Shavuos. Some years Nassau is before Shavuos, but in most years it's the week after. Nassau is the longest single Parsha. And it works beautifully then, because we've got the longest Parsha straight after we've received the Torah. And so Hashem says, and this year it's going to be an interesting one trying to learn that Parsha, because Shavuos is Wednesday, Thursday, and Shabbos is a day later, or 1 day break, and to go through the longest Parsha is pretty tough on a Friday in winter when there's not much time. But we manage, we get through it, we can do it on Shabbos as well. There is time. So that structure then is complicated with, like this year, for example, being a leap year. There's 54 Parshas. In a leap year, let's ignore the fact that 52 weeks in a solar year, because we're talking about a lunar year, which is adapted for a solar year. So this year we get an extra 4 weeks. And some years it's an extra 5 weeks for 5 Shabbosim in the extra month. Because the month is 29, 30 days. Each month is 29 or 30 days. So therefore, if the Rosh Chodesh is on a Shabbos, then there's another Shabbos in the month. And also depends on, as we discussed last week, what days of the week Yom Tov falls on. So if Yom Tov is on a weekday, all the Yom Tovim this year, except for Yom Kippur, on weekdays. Therefore, we've got extra Shabbosim that we need to lay in, and so therefore, coupled with the leap year and when everything falls out, determines exactly how many combined parshas and separate parshas. If it's not a leap year and we have Yom Tovs on a Shabbos, we've got to fit now 54 parshas into maybe 49 weeks or 48 weeks or whatever it is, and therefore we double up lots of parshas. This year, we only double up one parsha. And that's right at the end of the book of Bamidbar, Matos Maseh, which turns out to become the longest parsha of the lot. It's 244 verses from memory, the two together. That is a very, very long one. And so, depending on how the year falls out, depends on what we lay in every week. But there are rules and formulae for every single year that we'll put in place, because our calendar is now a fixed calendar, and so we know exactly when everything should happen. The calendar that we've got in place now was put in place by Hillel about 1600 years ago, based on exactly what happened in former times with the Sanhedrin, where the witnesses would come with the new moon, they would declare they saw the new moon. The Sanhedrin knew exactly when the new moon came out, but they relied on witnesses to tell them if they'd seen it, because that's what the Torah tells us. Once we never had a Sanhedrin and we couldn't declare the new moon, we needed to come up with a system. Now, Hillel at the time would have been a computer brain, because he put in place the calendar to last us till the year 6000. Now, will it carry on after that? That's a separate question. But if Mashiach is not here by then, which we do know that he will be here by then, but if Mashiach is not here, then that calendar stops. And we won't be able to have Yom Tov, for example, because Yom Tov is entirely dependent on Rosh Chodesh, which is why we have 2 days of Yom Tov, really, because Pesach is dependent on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. If messengers couldn't get out in time, then we didn't know exactly which day Pesach was. We knew it was 1 day or the other, which is why we have the 2 days. Rosh Hashanah is a slightly different reason, and the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah is in Israel as well, whereas the other Yom Tovim are not. And so our calendar, being done by this genius of a rabbi, set in place every single Rosh Chodesh till the year 6000. Exactly, we know exactly when it is, and the laning follows exactly by that same set of rules. We know this year is going to be this type of year. Rosh Hashanah is coming up this year, Rosh Hashanah is on a Thursday. Therefore, we need to read these parshas here and there, because we're going to have 1 or 2, depending on the year, weeks between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and how many Shabbosim do we have at that time? Therefore, we need to split up parshas. So the parshas right at the end of the Sefer Torah and end of Devarim are very, very short, depending on how the year falls out, so that we can always read V'zois HaBracha on Simchas Torah. And so that Shabbos Bereshis is always the Shabbos after Simchas Torah. Now this year, Sukkot is Thursday, Friday, like Rosh Hashanah. So Shmini Atzeres is on a Thursday, Simchas Torah for us on a Friday. Should be one day, everyone should have it on Thursday. But then we've got that one day till Shabbos Bereshis to learn Bereshis. So this year, it's going to be some fun times, but we've got most weeks, we don't have double parshas this year, so we get off pretty easily during those other weeks. So it works out, it always balances out, because the focus needs to be on what does Hashem want from me. And if we can focus on that, like the Torah said at the beginning, what does Hashem want from me, Im Bechukosai telechu, to toil in Torah, to focus on what can I do to improve my relationship with Hashem, improve my relationship with my fellow human beings, be one united Jewish people, then Hashem will send Mashiach, because we got a guarantee from Hashem that if we are following His rules, if we are unified, then He will be with us, He will remember His covenants that He made with Abraham, with Yitzhak, and with Yaakov, and He will bring Mashiach.